Pierce is a big ancient Roman history buff as well as just a history buff in general. And I was looking in preparation for this conversation, I was actually looking at some ancient Roman standards that they would hold at the front of their armies as well. And I was wondering, if you were able to reference any of those back in the original days, or if it really just came out of your head.
Honestly, I don't remember looking at any Roman standards, but I probably did. Pierce is such a buff of all things Roman, historical and iconographic. So he probably was like, look at this thing and look at this thing, or, but I don't remember. It doesn't stick out as being one of the sort of visual launching points. My visual launching point for the entire Red Rising design world was actually Soviet Russia. So when I was first thinking about it, and this is, I think the first thing I designed was actually the gold poster, the propaganda poster. And that came about of trying to figure out, like, how do I meld Roman Gilded Age with Soviet, like, space age propaganda? And trying to take those two things and basically make, like, a slightly more decadent version of Soviet propaganda, because for some reason that really, the Soviet space race and all of these amazing designs that came out of that era, like, really stuck out to me as both feeling sort of edgy and gritty while also being, sort of entirely overly optimistic, and then at the same time still somehow feeling futuristic, now almost 100 years later. And so that was the thing that I've come back to over and over again as a designer, is like, if you're at a loss, go back to Soviet propaganda and you'll immediately have 25 ideas. So less of the Roman standards and more of Soviet propaganda, actually.
Okay. So specifically probably like, 50s and 60s era?
Cold War status, yeah.
Yeah, space race, and I spent a lot of time, looking at, what the posters, like, because the Soviet government had this, like, massive creative arm that they paid artists that were like, all of these artists to make stuff about whatever it was, whether it was Lenin's statue or, a poster for how great our space program is, In fact, I actually recently stumbled on, this is the most incredible internet find of all time. And if you guys have already heard this, I'll be disappointed that I didn't get to share it with you first. The Soviet, I don't even know what they called it. It was their film program, the official government film program, made a multi-part Lord of the Rings film. Have you guys heard about this?
What?
No.
It's on YouTube. It is on YouTube
right now.
Oh my God.
So they made a multi-part, like, serialized Lord of the Rings that they filmed. I think it was probably in the 50s. It's in color, but it feels like a super high budget high school play of Lord of the Rings in Russian.
I need this in my life right now.
And so, like, the hobbits are, like, legitimately drunk. You're like, oh, you're actually drunk, like, as you're filming this. And, like, it's amazing. Like, I don't want to spoil too much of it for you, but it is, I think there's one episode, and they just, like, it came out, I learned about it because recently someone found it in an archive. It had never been digitized, and somehow during the fall, it was, like, filmed right before the fall of the USSR. And so maybe it must have been earlier than that, because the quality is so bad, but it was somehow in the, sort of chaos of Soviet Russia, it was never digitized, not really, like, properly, archived. And so it was recently rediscovered and have the entire thing. And whoever has I think they're saying they're going to put out it like serialized out in, like, order. So they posted the first one on YouTube. You can watch it. It's like a half an hour. There's no subtitles. It's all in Russian. But if you're a Lord of the Rings nerd like me, you can just follow along. You're like, I know what they're saying right now. And it's so good.
I am so excited to watch this. Thank you.
You're welcome.
For my afternoon treat.
You should definitely get high first. It's one of those.
I propose a viewing party to all our Discord members right now. We gotta.
We should.
Oh my goodness.
That would be so fun. Joel, if you're welcome to come, I know you're super busy, but if you want to come and drop in and watch it with us on our Discord, you're more than welcome to come in.
I might have to put aside the September 10th drop just to make this happen. So, yeah.
So the propaganda art is something that really caught me early on. And not only your piece, but just in general, my mind and creative kind of side of myself went to that, thinking probably originally more in terms of like 40s German propaganda. But again, I actually like what you're talking about, because instead of kind of that more simplified, you might call it like an Art Deco sort of leaning, but then you get those cleaner lines and you get that kind of space age look in the Soviet 50s and 60s, which is a cool call out.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I remember when it was probably my first graphic design class I ever took, my professor talking about the difference between I think it was like logo design. He was talking about how do you make something that's iconic, and by definition, meaning something that sort of stands the test of time. And so, in the visual world, especially in the 21st century, we live in this space where things change so quickly. Like styles change so quickly, typefaces change so quickly. What's cool changes so quickly, and we were talking about that, and he was saying, one of the ways as a designer you avoid something looking really dated is by avoiding sort of contemporary, whatever that momentary trend is. And you can look back on design history and see certain moments that really lasted because they were actually really fucking good. And that moment that you're talking about of like 40s German design is one of those moments. Soviet design very much riffed off of that and has a lot of the same sort of elements that are, geometric, sort of typographically driven, very bold and kind of blocky. And that, it's wild to me that 100 years on, it can still feel like it's both beautiful and futuristic. It's funny because it's almost like a trope that if you look at, TV shows that are about the future, they will reference Soviet design because it's like sort of embedded in us. It's like, that's the future, even though that it's 100 years ago now, so it's beautiful stuff. It really is.
Yeah. If this thing ever goes to TV, I just anticipate kind of that very Blade Runner inner, like dirty, scummy city. You're going under a dark underpass and you just see this disgusting, cringeworthy, I love you poster from the facade.
I would never put anything out that gross. So.
Oh, dang, you claiming that?
Your propaganda department is far better.
Oh yeah, of course.
Joel, I have this feeling like you were watching the Russian version of The Hobbit and you were picturing Middle Earth in this, and suddenly you gained all this inspiration for the Institute House map. Is that how it went down?
That's definitely how it went down.
That's exactly it.
It's funny. I very much was looking at classic fantasy maps for the first map, and that was what Pierce asked me to do. And it was something that we both immediately sort of, before anything was designed, knew that we wanted, was sort of referencing this classic map while also adding this sort of space age side to it, which was the sigils. And so it's funny because the first map is actually very different from the rest of them. It feels much more like a classic fantasy map than the next 4 maps. But that was the idea. We really both had this soft spot in our hearts for those classic fantasy maps, and I actually hand drew the entire thing. That was the whole thing was.
Oh, wow.
It just felt like it had to be sort of done by hand to do it in that style, and I ended up reworking it digitally after I drew it by hand. I did some touch-ups and stuff, but for the most part, it's just a really high-res scan of a drawing.
Had you ever attempted that before? Like a map?
No, I mean, as a kid, I did that shit all the time. I would make, Lord of the Rings style maps of my backyard and then burn the edges and soak them in coffee and then hide them in tree stumps and be like, there's a treasure map out here. So I loved that sort of stuff. And I grew up, I would do my own versions of Lord of the Rings maps and Narnia maps and anything I could get my hands on. I was didn't have that many friends. So I'm just kidding. I had friends. But
you still have any Narnia maps you can send me?
What's that?
I know.
You still have any Narnia maps from you and your kid you can send me?
My mom probably does somewhere, but
she's listening right now, I'm assuming. So Joel's mom, if you can find in your basement some maps of Narnia that Joel did as a child, Philip, would love to have them because I'm a huge. I got Aslan and Bulgy Bear right there. I don't know if you can
There
see.
you
Joel.
go. There you go.
I leaned away from them. This is great podcast material when I talk about something that's on my arm, so everyone can see.
Visualize with us. Visualize Aslan on a bulging bicep.
Yes. Boom.
I'm loving this. Mrs. Joel's mom, please send me.
Yes, her
Old
entire
Joel
identity is based off of me being born. That is totally true.
Amazing.